Thank you, Mr. President, and I'd like to thank my colleague from Oregon for his remarks as he serves as ranking member of the Finance Committee. I know that he is always thinking about how our tax system is working for regular people in this country and how we make sure that it is fair, that it is funding the critical services that we have, and that we are not putting the burden on regular people and letting billionaires and big corporations off the hook. And so I just want to thank you for your words. I was listening closely to what you were saying, and I think it's very important in this moment that we hear this. Colleagues, we've been up all night long. It's 8:45, I think, in Washington, D.C. It is 7:30 or 7:45 in Minnesota, where my family is. My grandchildren are just about getting up and getting ready for school, and I think we're going to get some snow in Minnesota this morning. And in New Mexico, where my 95-year-old father lives, it is only about 6:45 in the morning, and he's probably thinking about getting up. And Senator Wyden, in your home state of Oregon, it is only about 5:45. And every place around this country, people are getting up, and they may be noticing that we have kept the Senate in session all night long. And they may be wondering what this is all about and why we are doing this and what impact this has on their lives. Because after all, we're talking about the nomination of a man, Russell Vought, to lead something called the OMB. And I would guess that a lot of people in this country don't even really know what the OMB is. So Office of Management and Budget, it oversees federal agencies' performance and administers the federal budget. Sounds pretty innocuous, right? Not anything that you should be too worried about. It seems like the role of this agency would be to make sure that the laws that are passed by Congress are implemented, that the federal budget, which is the purview of Congress, is implemented in a way that reflects what the representatives of people of this country asked and expected. But so we're here today, colleagues, and those that are listening, we're here today because what is happening with this nomination of Russell Vought, this confirmation that we're going to be taking up at some point later today, kind of masked in this innocuous OMB, is actually one of the biggest power grabs that I think we have ever seen in the history of our country. A massive power grab by the executive to seize power that rightly, as described in the Constitution, belongs to Congress. Because what Mr. Vought and Donald Trump and Elon Musk have proposed is that with Russell Vought leading the Office of Management and Budget, they can just pretty much ignore what Congress has said we should do with the federal budget. And so I want to just spend a little bit of time talking about what that means and talking about what it means for you if you're here on the East Coast, or if you're in the Midwest where my family is, or in the Southwest where my father is, or any place in this country. What does that mean to you as you're getting up this morning? Because we've seen, we don't have to hypothesize what this means with Russell Vought leading the OMB, with Elon Musk running rampant throughout the federal government, what this nomination means and why we need to oppose it. Because we can see it. It's right there in front of our eyes, because they have already started to implement their plans, the plans that are laid out in Project 2025. And I just want to read, I was just looking, say this to my colleague from Oregon. I was just looking at the latest news just to give us an idea of what this really means. Here's a quote from a lawyer in the Washington Post. This is part of a Washington Post story that posted this morning. This is not some radical progressive lawyer who said this. This is Ty Cobb, who served in the first Trump administration. And he says what's going on here today with this Vought nomination, and especially with Elon Musk, he says, this is a quote, "It is a naked power grab consistent with what Trump's advisors have persuaded him to do, which is to flood the zone with as much unconstitutional activity as possible, with the hope that they will get away with some or all of it." Now, this is Ty Cobb, who served as White House lawyer during Trump's first term. So I offer that up as sort of preamble to my remarks, because I think it shows that even Republican lawyers can identify that what is happening here with the Trump administration and then with this nomination of Russell Vought is a naked power grab to seize power from the representatives elected by the people of this country in Congress and concentrate it in the White House in the hands of Elon Musk and Russell Vought in order for them just to run rampant over our constitutional system. So, as I said, you don't have to just believe me when you hear what I'm telling you, because we could see them already start this process. And last week, the Trump administration, we could see they hurt real people in my state, in the state of Oregon, the state of Florida, by creating this unprecedented chaos in federal agencies and programs, all based on the blueprint of Project 2025. And Russell Vought, whose nomination the Senate is considering today, is the architect of that blueprint. And I think you can see that his ideas, they're dangerous, they're unconstitutional, and they are already causing real harm to people. In just the 2 weeks since President Trump has been in office, I guess it's 2.5 weeks at this point, what he has done is he has attempted to freeze federal funding that was authorized and appropriate. That's our job. And whether this freeze right now is whether it's still frozen, whether it has been enjoined or temporarily blocked by the courts, whether the administration has turned on the funding spigots in some places, not in others, as my colleague from Oregon has said, it's created massive confusion. And I know in Minnesota, some people say the money is coming again, as it should be constitutionally. Others are saying it isn't. None of that really matters in this moment as we consider this nomination, because I do believe, as Ty Cobb said, that the chaos is the point. Creating the chaos is the point. Hurting people right now, that is the impact of that. And so what we're doing is we're seeing what Russell Vought's extreme and dangerous ideas mean and how far they are willing to take this. So think about this for a minute in Minnesota, my home state, where a federal funding freeze is truly life or death. The administration's list of programs that they have frozen or want to freeze covers most basic needs for a lot of people: food, shelter, medicine, safe drinking water. I've heard from thousands of Minnesotans who are terrified about what this means. The Senate phone lines into my office over this last week, and I suspect that this has been the case for many of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, they have been overwhelmed by people calling in and basically saying, what is happening here? How could this be happening? I'm worried that I'm not going to get my Social Security check. I'm worried that the organization that I run to provide domestic shelter for women who are victims of domestic violence is going to have to shut down. I'm worried that the services that we provide to people who are resettling in Minnesota, often this is done by faith organizations in my home state. I'm worried that we're not going to be able to do those things. Our phone lines have been overwhelmed with stories like that. And I would have to say, colleagues, just a level of outrage and just furiousness that I haven't seen for a long time, because people can see that this is having an impact. And, this is not, people call my office who voted for Vice President Harris. People call my office who voted for Donald Trump. But what I'm not seeing here a distinction. What I'm seeing is even people who voted for President Trump are saying, this is not what I voted for. This is not the vision that I had for my country. This is not the campaign that I voted for to lower the cost of groceries, or even many of the things that I completely disagree with the president. This is actually having an impact on real families and people and hurting them. And where is this going to lead from here? I think the scope of the Trump and Vought Project 2025 and the funding freeze that it has inspired is so broad that I don't think there is a single person in this country who wouldn't be impacted in some way, either directly or indirectly. And I don't think it will be good for anyone. And I also just detect, colleagues, from the calls that I am getting in, it's easy to see all the calls coming into my office, that Americans are feeling a lot less safe and a lot less secure than they did last Monday, before this all unfolded, before this funding freeze that was described and is now being implemented, was described by Project 2025 and Russell Vought, and now is being implemented as happening. People do not feel as safe today. And they know the reason why, is that this freeze has put our most fundamental and essential services in limbo. So in Minnesota, cities have been notified that their federal funds to help pay law enforcement salaries are subject to the freeze. Giving you an idea of what impact this has. Counterterrorism coordination programs, programs to combat human and sex and drug trafficking, programs to fight child sex trafficking have all been covered by this, by this fund. It's really a funding cut, to be honest. It's like suddenly you had the money and now you don't have the money anymore to do these things. That feels like a cut if you're looking at your organization and what you're trying to accomplish. So what does that mean if you're the victim of a violent crime? The federal program that helps you to recover from that, to get restitution, those services have been frozen. If you are the survivor of sexual violence or domestic violence, you don't have the same access to a safe place to be. You are less safe because of Russell Vought and Donald Trump and Elon Musk. And this should be worrying to every single one of us Americans, whether or not you are in that specific situation or whether you just have some compassion and care for folks that are in that terrible situation. Vought and Trump's funding freeze has also endangered, as I said, the survivors of domestic and sexual violence. Without these services, which are supported by federal tax dollars, survivors will have no place to go. Domestic violence shelters truly save lives. And any delay or freeze in federal grant funding means that those services provided, for example, by Alexandria House or the Southern Valley Alliance in Minnesota will have huge impacts. And the survivors who count on those places to go, sometimes with their children, to be safe, will be much, much less safe. Colleagues, I heard from one domestic violence organization in Minnesota, which gets 70% of their funding from federal grants. And so think about that organization. Even a short delay in reimbursements will mean that they have to lay off their counselors and other folks that work there and stop services. These are not organizations that have millions of dollars in their bank account. They live hand to mouth. They are providing services as they're able to get the funds to do it. And if we allow Russell Vought and Donald Trump and Elon Musk to continue this, it's not just these organizations that suffer, it is the individuals that count on them. And I know that many folks would find themselves in life-threatening situations as a result. Mr. President, I can see from what's happening in Minnesota that the freeze is also creating serious strain on our healthcare system. Even if you don't use a community health center yourself, the freeze of their funding could make it harder for you to get access to timely care. So, throughout the country, there is this incredible network of community health centers which provides primary care to moms and children. Many of these facilities are providing not only physical health care, but mental health care, which I think we all know is life-saving, and people count on this network of community health centers to get their basic care. That might be you, or it might be somebody who lives in your community, or it might be you may know somebody who goes there. But here's why this affects you if you're waking up in Minneapolis or New Mexico, where my dad is, or Oregon, where Senator Wyden's is from, or New Jersey, where Senator Booker is from. So if folks don't have those community health centers to go to, where are they going to go when they get sick? Because a funding freeze is not going to freeze sickness. A funding freeze is not going to freeze injury. It only freezes the places where people who are experiencing those things can go to get help. And so what are they going to do instead? They're going to go to emergency rooms. And right now in Minnesota, emergency rooms are packed full of people who have the flu, who have RSV, who have norovirus. Community health centers are a source of huge relief to emergency rooms because it creates a place for people to go who need urgent care. And if they're not there, what is going to happen is that those individuals are going to do the only thing they can do, which is to flood emergency rooms. So if you get your primary health insurance through Medicaid, for example, just remember, colleagues, that is about 45% of all moms who are delivering babies. It is about maybe roughly 40% of all children in this country who get their health insurance through Medicaid. If you can't go to one of those community health centers, then you're going to end up in the ER. And that means in Minnesota, that's 170,000 people who could lose with these funding freezes, who could lose their access to health care. And that means 170,000 people who are going to end up in emergency rooms. And that is going to affect all of us. That's going to affect the health and safety of all of us. It's going to put huge stress on hospitals and be again, another example of how Russell Vought and Donald Trump and Elon Musk are actually, in their actions right now today, making all of us less safe, less secure. Last Tuesday, I heard from community health centers who were preparing to furlough workers by the end of the day as these funding freezes were sifting through the news and getting to them directly. And I think it's important to understand, yes, the courts did issue a sort of a short-term reprieve or rescission to stop that, but those organizations are still trying to decide in real time, like, what they can do and how they can move forward. This morning I was listening on the radio to organizations who said they had to furlough people when those freezes came into place, and even when they were temporarily lifted, they're in the process of trying to figure out how to bring those people back. And every minute that goes by, that is wasted energy and effort and time. You know, I think about my Republican colleagues who say that they want to see efficiency, they want to see government run like a business, and yet this kind of just outrageous, unpredictable, chaotic funding freezes and then unfrozen and back and forth is the epitome of inefficiency. And who bears the price of that? Who bears the price of this Russell Vought strategy to try to do this big power grab away from Congress and taking away not following the laws that Congress passed? The organizations that are serving Minnesotans and Americans are paying the price, and ultimately Americans are paying the price for that every single day. And every minute that goes by in which the threat of rescinded or withheld funding is still out there, there's real consequences for people. You know, across the country, we are facing a very real health threat, public health threat, when it comes to the avian flu. This is another example of how Russell Vought and Donald Trump and Elon Musk are in real time hurting the health and safety of Minnesotans and Americans. So in Minnesota, farmers and producers understand the impacts of avian flu better than anyone else. Minnesota is the largest turkey producer in the state. We also have large dairy herds, big food processing facilities, very important to our economy, important to tens and tens of thousands of jobs and billions of dollars of economic activity in Minnesota. So right now, Minnesota farmers and producers are grappling with the avian influenza. Last year, the bird flu jumped from poultry to livestock, and then it jumped from livestock to humans. So this is something we have to pay a lot of attention to. It is something that could be extremely concerning. This is something that the federal government has to take seriously to prevent a real crisis, an economic crisis, and a public health crisis. And by the way, colleagues, if you're wondering why the price of eggs has gone up so much in the last month or so, several months or so, that this is why. It is because over 100 million birds have been culled from flocks all across the country because of avian influenza. And yet, what has Russell Vought done? What would Russell Vought do? What has Donald Trump done? What is Elon Musk doing to address this problem? Well, the programs that support my state's and your state's public health infrastructure, those programs were included in this freeze. On top of that, the communications blackout that also happened in the very early days of the Trump administration as part of this Russell Vought Project 2025 agenda. There was a communications blackout from all federal health agencies, which also applies, by the way, to their communications with Congress. So that means none of us, all of the work that was happening, nonpartisan work, non-political work, all of that work that was happening, the communications about this really concerning public health threat of avian influenza, that was all stopped. And now, what I am hearing reports of from my friends and colleagues back home in Minnesota is that they're seeing this public health data, which is very important to fighting the avian flu. Some of that data has been removed from government websites. It's like they're trying to erase it. Who knows why this is? Maybe there was some mention of the word inclusion in that, what was in those public health reports, and so they got scrubbed. Who knows why that is? But that is another example, colleagues, of how this sort of strategy of Russell Vought and Project 2025 and Donald Trump, how it's hurting our health. Because I can tell you, we would all be better off if we had access to that public health data so that we could understand what was going on and what is happening. We're supposed to be doing surveillance on the avian flu so that we know where it's going, what other flocks it might be infecting, whether we're seeing additional jumps to humans, what humans are infected, but yet Russell Vought's plans are putting all of us at risk. He is making all of us less safe in this circumstance. I know my colleague from New Jersey is going to be ready to speak in just a few minutes, and so I will just want to touch on maybe one or two other examples of what is happening in Minnesota as a result of the Project 2025 plan, Donald Trump's plans, and why opposing Russell Vought's nomination is so important. Minnesota is in the far north part of this country, as many of you know. It can get cold in Minnesota, and yesterday it got down to minus 12 degrees in International Falls. We are in the dead of winter in Minnesota, and there's a great effort that we have long had, often has had bipartisan support, which helps keep the heat on for low-income families when it gets really cold outside. The idea, which is so obvious to me, is that if it's in the wintertime and you're having trouble paying your heating bill, you ought to be able to get a bridge working with your utility so that the heat doesn't get turned off, so that your kids aren't cold in the dead of winter, so that you can stay in your home rather than moving to a shelter, so that you're able to have a safe place to call home. This program is called LIHEAP. I won't tell you what the acronyms are because I never remember the acronyms myself, but it's a very important way to make sure that people can stay in their homes and can stay warm when it gets really cold outside in places like International Falls in Minnesota. And yet, this program, LIHEAP, was subject to the funding freeze that was put into place a couple of weeks ago by Donald Trump, part of Russell Vought's Project 2025 plan. This funding freeze also, and I'll close with this funding freeze also has put Minnesotans at risk of going hungry. Food is already expensive. I was talking about the price of eggs and the avian flu and the dangers to our public safety with the funding freezes putting out public health information. But what about bringing down the price of groceries, which is, I think, if you voted for Donald Trump, that might have been what was in your mind as you decided you were going to vote for him. Well, in this country today, more than 47 million people experience hunger. They don't always know where their next meal is going to come from. They're not sure how they're going to be able to feed their children dinner as well as breakfast. 1 in 5 children live in families where that is their circumstance. And some of the most, the people that we care about the most, seniors, children, folks that are working hard and working in low income, have low wage jobs. So what they depend on federal nutrition assistance to meet their basic needs. And of course, these programs don't just provide food, they are a real lifeline for families as they're working to get ahead, to work their way up, to get to where they want to be. A great example of this is Meals on Wheels, which is about about making sure that seniors have a warm meal, but it also is about more than that. It is about social connection and dealing with issues of loneliness and isolation, which so sadly afflicts so many of our elders in this in our country. And this is something that works really well. It's been in place for a long time. It's not a red issue or a blue issue. It's not a rural issue or a urban issue. It is something that makes a huge, huge difference. And so what's happening, colleagues, is that in every community in this country has members who need help, have people who need help feeding their families, and Russell Vought is working to take that help away. So I started out by talking about how people in this country are waking up in the morning and wondering why they should care about who runs the Office of Management and Budget, this somewhat innocuous sounding agency which oversees federal agency performance and administers the federal budget. And I hope that in these comments, I've laid out just a few of the ways that this nomination of Russell Vought could have a clear impact on your life, on your safety, on your security, because his extreme agenda is anathema to how we should be running this country, and it is anathema to the basic belief that this country is founded on, the basic structure that we have, which is that Congress, the elected representatives of the people of this country, make decisions about how we're going to spend your precious tax dollars. And then it is the job of the Office of OMB to make sure that those intentions are followed through in the federal government. And what Russell Vought wants to do is to turn that on its head. He says, I don't care what Congress said. I don't care what your representatives voted for in Congress. I'm going to do it my way. And that is the most blatant power grab, counter to your interests, that I have ever seen. And this is why, colleagues, it is so important that we oppose the nomination of Russell Vought. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.